Welcome back to Digital Health Entrepreneurship Daily with Laurence, Girard. On today's episode, we are going to talk a little bit about a controversial book called The No Asshole Rule. Now, this comes up on our podcast because, Laurence, I think I heard you say the other day that you were potentially starting a asshole elimination program in your company. Is this true?
Correct.
And what in
That
the
is
world
correct.
is going on?
That's correct. So what is this book about, The No Asshole Rule? Well, what it's about is basically corporate culture. And it talks about you might have a software engineer or a salesperson that does really good on paper, really well on paper. I'll correct my grammar. And they are just an asshole to everyone. They are mean. They don't communicate well. They have an attitude all the time. So what do you do if you have a salesperson that's generating $1 million of revenue a year, but they're just a jerk, right? They're making other employees maybe just quit working at the company, or it's just bringing down morale. Like, should you keep that person just because of their sales numbers, or should you get rid of them? And that's a difficult question that entrepreneurs have to deal with.
Yeah, Laurence, this is insane. This is so fantastic. The no asshole rule, eliminating assholes. Just give us some examples. Just let us into your world. You know, what's happening? You're like, maybe don't name names.
No, I have a great example that I have no problem talking about. You know, we have this social media agency, and they basically, we had to pay them an invoice, right? And I didn't have time to respond to them. It was like, they emailed me in the morning. I had back-to-back calls. I was on a 3-hour call with the CDC, all these huge calls back-to-back. And I had just paid them $25,000 on Monday. And then like Monday at 6 p.m., I hadn't responded because they wanted like another $10,000 because we pay them by the hour. And so they emailed us and they're like, well, we're going to have to pause all work because you haven't, paid this $10,000 yet, which is ridiculous, right? I mean, every company has an accounts payable and an accounts receivable department, where, bills don't get paid within 8 hours. So, I thought that was maybe not the most extreme example, but like, it's just uncalled for, right? We're paying your company 6 figures, and it's just not necessary that you are, that strict. But I think the more extreme example, and the examples that the book talks about more, it's like, just look at that story about Fox News where like there was sexual harassment going on, where like they let these executives get away with sexual harassment because they were generating tons of sales numbers. And that's like a pretty common example, right? Or let's say you have an employee that just gives you an attitude every time you talk to them, right? Or their coworkers, and they're just mean to other people, or they're just constantly resistant to getting feedback or getting constructive criticism. I mean, sometimes those people are pretty talented, so what do you do, right? Do you just ignore the fact that they're damaging the corporate culture, or do you get rid of them?
Yeah, I've got a similar thing with friends. My thinking is, if a friend is nice to me, but they're a prick to the waiter, then I should probably be very wary about them. The same thing with that social media company you mentioned, Laurence. If they're nice to you, but they're really uptight and a bit assholey on this one financial thing, like one payment, a few hours late or whatever, they'll probably be annoying or not worth the hassle later on about other things. Like it's an indicative thing. What other things, what other companies or business partners or something make you think of this asshole elimination rule?
Well, I just think that one of the reasons why entrepreneurs tolerate assholes in their company is that they think that their employees are not replaceable. They think that like, oh, it'd be so hard to find somebody to replace this employee. It's just like almost never true. Like I'm replaceable as a CEO.
It's like a sunk cost, the sunk cost feeling.
Well, yeah, right. But I mean, I could get hit by a bus tomorrow, and our chief operating officer could step in and be the CEO of the company, right? So like everybody's replaceable all the way up to the CEO, and it's just like, I'll give you a good example. Like let's see what I should share. Let's put it this way. my former co-founder, basically, he's a very nice guy, like when you talk with him, but there's other ways of being an asshole, like not communicating in a timely fashion or, that kind of thing, right? And it's just like communication is a form of culture too, and I guess like since we've switched software teams and we've brought in so many like really talented, motivated software engineers where they're all on Slack the whole day. They respond instantly. Like the energy that you get, it's kind of like a snowball where you build off of each other's energy, and it makes people want to work 16 hours a day, even if they're not getting paid to do so. So the problem is that you might look at this person that's generating $1 million of revenue, but they're bringing down the morale of everybody else on the team. And one or two people might quit here and there because they don't like working with that person. And so that's the problem. It's just, it brings down the energy of the entire company. So I found since we kind of switched software teams and we got, people that were like really dedicated to what we're doing, that like it brings up the energy of not just the engineers, but the salespeople and the customer service, and everybody's working towards a shared goal. And you just build off of each other's energy, where you think about a person like our CTO is like adored and admired by these software engineers. Like there's like multiple people that just quit their jobs just because they wanted to work for our chief technology officer again, because they worked for him at a previous company, right? And so it's that kind of culture that you want, where you wake up in the morning and you're like, I love the people that I work with, right, and I can't wait to talk to them because every conversation is enjoyable. It just, because you don't waste emotional energy that way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think all of us have probably had people that we've worked with that we've absolutely loved, and others that it's just the total opposite. And you dread going to work, even if you like the work, because of the people you're around. So what do you do if you are listening to this and you realize, well, shoot, I'm kind of surrounded by a bunch of assholes. Like I'm surrounded by a bunch of people that are really talented, but super dysfunctional. Like as an executive or a business owner, does that mean like, are you just going to go on a firing spree, or like, what's the next step?
Well, obviously in a perfect world, you would hire slowly and fire quickly, but it doesn't always work out like that. Right? It maybe just make sure you make the right hires to begin with, but you don't always know. I think it's also kind of like a policy of having almost zero tolerance. I mean, I think people should get second and even third chances, but like if you talk to somebody 2 or 3 times about what they're doing and they don't change their behavior, there's really a problem there. Right. And if it's so extreme that it's bringing the culture down, it's just like, what's wrong with this person's personality? So you really have to wonder. So I think that like, again, hire slowly, fire quickly is probably generally a good idea, but also try to figure out like, why is there such an issue? Is it something that you're doing? And just try to have open communication like that. But like, it's even with investors too. Like we have 300 plus investors in Fruit Street, and most of them are small investors that put in $25,000. And I include them in an advisory board on this software called Basecamp. And I tell them like, look, Basecamp is an advisory board. It's not like you're right as a shareholder to be in Basecamp. And, the nice thing about Basecamp is that the physicians can respond instantly and give their comments, right? But there were 2 assholes recently that decided that they were going to post dumb comments like saying that our financial projections are pie in the sky without providing any scientific evidence, or, suggesting that like, we basically had to authorize more shares because we had to raise more capital. It's a very normal thing to do. Or so he suggested something that wasn't fact-based, that, somehow that's like a breach of our obligation to the shareholders. And, he decided to do this in front of 700 people without providing any factual evidence for his argument. And so said, well, okay, you're gone, you're out of here, right? The asshole elimination program has been initiated and nobody wants to hear from you because you're just bringing tons and tons of negative energy. I think that people don't realize that there should be like an accounting system for the emotional energy of companies. Like somebody should probably invent a software that surveys employees, and this probably exists already, but surveys employees and asks them like how high their morale is. And obviously if you were to compare the morale of a company versus their success, I would guess that if the morale is high, the company is financially successful. And so, I think that morale is almost like a leading indicator of financial success. First, the morale has to be high. First, the culture has to be good. And then in 3 to 6 months, that's going to show revenue success.
Right.
It's
Does
not
it
the
always,
opposite. Like revenue is not good, and then that makes the culture good. It's the opposite order. Culture comes first, then revenue. Like revenue does not fix a bad culture.
okay, so this next question will open up a bit of a can of worms that we'll probably have to dive deeper into on another day's episode. But with what you're saying of culture and then revenue, like the classic example that's gotten a lot of press for that not working is WeWork, where like to the outside, to the public, it's been like super cool to work there, like this real big focus on culture. But like, I mean, they're literally losing several $billions. So like, what's the balance of that?
Well, it's obviously not automatic that if you have a good culture and you're playing ping pong all day and drinking, fruit water at WeWork, that, you automatically have a lot of revenue. Obviously, you have to have a sound business model. But I think culture is a prerequisite in many cases for, revenue. Sure, like you might have outliers. You might get really lucky and just work in an industry that's taking off. So it's not like it's always the case, right? But I would say that like more often than not, you have a good culture first and then you have revenue.
Hey, Laurence, do you think much about discretionary effort of your staff? Like, so for instance, we talked a lot about the energy and of the staff and the adoration of the CTO by the software engineers, and you've talked about those sort of things that refer to and link to revenue. But do you think much about discretionary effort? Like whether or not an employee gives this extra bit of information, extra bit of effort that they could withhold if they didn't want to. Do you think about like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they do that when they have a good culture and they enjoy what they're working on and they feel like their work is important and their colleagues value their work.
Mm-hmm.
I think also like, talented people get messages from recruiters all the time on LinkedIn. And so ask yourself this question: would your employee leave for a $10,000 to $20,000 raise? And if the answer is yes, you probably have a bad culture, right? Versus like if you're a startup, like sometimes startups miss their funding milestones. So like if you had to go to your employees and say everybody has to take a 20% pay cut for 3 months while we close our next funding round, like would they stay or would they leave at the first sight of a problem? I mean, I think that they would stay if they love the product they're working on, they love the culture, and they enjoy the people that they work with. If you don't enjoy the people that you work with and somebody else is offering you more money, why would you stay and work with people that you don't like? It makes no sense.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So like super, as we close, like super practical next step for somebody who realizes they have some people in their social circle or on their team that probably need to go. Like, do you just walk up to that person and say, hey, you're an asshole, you're gone? Like what would you actually like recommend for somebody that's listening? Like, okay, I need to probably get rid of some people around me.
Well, I mean, not everybody's an entrepreneur. The beautiful thing about being an entrepreneur is that you basically get to choose who you work with. But let's say you're not an entrepreneur. I mean, I have a family member that's working at a company that they don't like and they can't fire their boss. So my advice would probably be, instead of looking for another job while you're at your job, sometimes you just have to quit. Like my wife did that. She quit her job, without having another job lined up. And not everybody has the luxury to do that, but like if your spouse is working and you can go, 30 days without having two incomes, or live on unemployment for a little bit, like that's fine, because it's often like you have to get just kind of, I find that sometimes people are so scared about finding their next job when they're super talented in the tech industry. If you're like a super talented person, like, I don't know, you're a software engineer or you have like a management degree or something, I mean, you could probably find another job really quick. Like, especially if you live in a place like Manhattan. I mean, do you know how many people are hiring usually? I just think that sometimes talented people they stay at their current job too long. Like if you can afford to quit, like maybe you have some savings that you can live off of for a few months, just quit your job and just put all of your effort into finding a new job, because more often than not, talented people have no problem finding a job.
Yeah. And I think that culturally, more and more people are they're aligning with what you're saying. So I think like, for the last several decades, your talent alone could take you further, but it seems like, your emotional intelligence, your ability to actually connect with people, your ability to actually be a nice person and be a fit and a part of a culture is actually, it's much more important. So I think people need to realize too that like your talent is not the only thing. Like eventually you might run into a job where you're doing really, really well, but you're a jerk and you might lose that job. So I think people also need to realize we just need to be nicer people in general too. But I appreciate you
Well,
bringing this
think about
topic up.
sales. Salespeople are so nice to you, right? I was gonna say, think about sales, right? Salespeople are so nice when they're selling. Like a lot of life is sales, right? It's like being nice to other people so that they want to work with you, right?
Right. Yeah, they're nice until you work with them for a while, and then they start showing their true colors, and you realize they were just a snake oil salesman. But I appreciate you bringing this up, and I think this topic will be helpful for our listeners. So thanks a lot, Laurence.
Thanks. And don't be an asshole.